Welcome, wherever you are right now, in bed, on the sofa, headphones in, lights off. We're glad you're here. This is a place to slow down, let your mind wander, and drift off to sleep to the story of one of gaming's greatest companies. So get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, and let the history of Sega carry you gently into the night. And if you find yourself still wide awake, drop a comment below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, what time it is, or share your favorite memory with Sega. We'd love to hear it. From pinball machines in post-war Japan to one of the most iconic video game companies in history, this is the story of Sega, a company born from the ambitions of American businessmen, shaped by Japanese innovation, and defined by some of the greatest games and consoles ever created. Over the next 35 minutes, we'll trace every triumph, every misstep, every console war, and every unforgettable character that made Sega one of the most beloved names in gaming. The story of Sega begins not in Japan, but in America. In the late 1940s, a company called Service Games was founded to supply coin-operated amusement machines, primarily slot machines, to U.S. military bases in Japan, Hawaii, and across the Pacific. The founders, Marty Bromley, Richard Stewart, and Raymond Lemaire, saw an opportunity in post-war leisure. American soldiers stationed abroad were hungry for entertainment, and jukeboxes and slot machines were a lucrative business. However, in 1951, the U.S. government cracked down on slot machine operations on military bases, forcing Service Games to pivot. The company shifted its focus to coin-operated amusement machines that were legal and family-friendly, things like pinball machines and early arcade games. This pivot would prove to be the foundation of everything that followed. In 1952, the company established a presence in Japan, importing coin-operated machines from the United States. By 1954, they had partnered with a Japanese company called Rosen Enterprises, run by David Rosen, an American businessman who had been importing machines to Japan. The two companies eventually merged in 1965 to form Sega Enterprises Limited. The name Sega was a portmanteau of the first two letters of Service Games, SE and GA. And so, in the bustling streets of 1960s Japan, a legend was born. Sega's first major success came in 1966, with an electromechanical arcade game called Periscope. Players would look through a periscope viewer and shoot at cardboard ships, moving along a conveyor belt, using light and sound effects to create an immersive naval battle experience. Periscope was such a hit that it became the first arcade game to be exported from Japan to the United States and Europe, and it introduced the concept of the quarter, the 25-cent play, to arcades worldwide. It was a pivotal moment that established Sega as a serious player in the amusement industry. Throughout the late 1960s, Sega continued to grow, releasing dozens of electromechanical arcade games. In 1969, the company was acquired by Gulf and Western Industries, an American conglomerate. This acquisition provided Sega with the financial backing to expand aggressively. However, it also meant that Sega was now subject to the decisions of a large corporate parent that didn't always understand the nuances of the amusement industry. This tension between corporate control and creative freedom would become a recurring theme in Sega's history. The early 1970s changed everything. In 1972, Atari released Pong, and the video game industry was born overnight. Sega, already a veteran of the coin-operated amusement business, was perfectly positioned to ride this wave. They quickly developed their own video arcade games, including Pong clones and original titles. One of their early hits was a racing game called Grand Track 10, though they also produced their own driving games independently around this time. The late 1970s were a golden age for arcades, and Sega was a major contributor. When Taito's Space Invaders exploded onto the scene in 1978, It sparked a wave of shoot-'em-up games that Sega eagerly joined. They released numerous titles competing for quarters in arcades around the world. But Sega's biggest early arcade success was yet to come, a game that would put their name on the tip of every gamer's tongue. In 1982, Sega released Zaxxon, one of the most technically impressive arcade games of its era. Zaxxon was remarkable for its isometric perspective, giving it a pseudo-3D appearance that was absolutely groundbreaking at the time. Players flew a spaceship through enemy fortresses, navigating around walls and dodging missiles. The game was a massive hit, cementing Sega as one of the premier arcade game developers in the world. It was followed by other successes including Pengo and Buck Rogers, Planet of Zoom. By the early 1980s, home video game consoles were becoming a major market, dominated by Atari. Sega decided it was time to bring their arcade expertise into living rooms around the world. On July 15, 1983, the same day Nintendo launched the Famicom in Japan, Sega released the SG-1000, their first home video game console. The timing could not have been more challenging. Nintendo's Famicom was technically superior and had stronger software support, and it quickly dominated the Japanese market. The SG-1000 sold modestly but failed to make a significant dent. Sega wasn't deterred. In 1985 in Japan and 1986 in North America, they launched the Sega Master System, a significantly more powerful console that could hold its own against the Nintendo Entertainment System. The Master System had a built-in game called Snail Maze hidden in its BIOS, and it came with a light gun called the Light Phaser and a 3D glasses accessory. While the Master System was largely defeated by the NES in North America and Japan, it found tremendous success in Europe and Brazil, where it outsold Nintendo consoles for years. The Master System's success in Europe is a fascinating chapter in gaming history. While Nintendo had locked up distribution deals in North America that effectively squeezed out competitors, Sega partnered with Tonka in the US and distributed the Master System through normal retail channels in Europe. In countries like France, Germany, and especially Brazil, the Master System became the dominant gaming platform of the late 1980s. In Brazil, the console remained so popular that Tectoy, Sega's local partner, continued manufacturing and selling new Master System units well into the 21st century, a remarkable legacy for an 8-bit console. While the Master System struggled against the NES in key markets, Sega's engineers were already working on something extraordinary. The Mega Drive, known as the Sega Genesis in North America, was in development, and it represented a quantum leap in home console technology. Powered by a Motorola 6T8000 processor, the same chip used in early Apple Macintosh computers, the Genesis was capable of bringing arcade-quality games into homes for the first time. It launched in Japan on October 29, 1988, and in North America on August 14, 1989. The Genesis launched with a small but impressive library, including Altered Beast, a side-scrolling beat-em-up that showcased the hardware's capabilities with its digitized voice samples and smooth animation. But Sega knew they needed more than good hardware to take on Nintendo. They needed a strategy, and they found one by going after an older, more male demographic, teenagers and young adults who wanted games with more edge and attitude than what Nintendo offered. Sega began positioning itself as the cool, rebellious alternative to Nintendo's family-friendly image. The most consequential decision in Sega's history came in 1990, when the company held an internal competition to create a mascot character that could rival Nintendo's Mario. Among the entries was a spiky blue hedgehog created by artist Naoto Oshima, programmed by Yuji Naka, and designed as a game by Hirokazu Yasuhara. The character was fast, blindingly fast, and his game was built around speed in a way that nothing else had ever been. His name was Sonic, and he would change everything. On June 23rd, 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog launched alongside a new bundle that included the Genesis console. The game was an immediate sensation. Sonic's speed, his attitude, tapping his foot impatiently when left idle, his thumbs up on the title screen, and the sheer exhilaration of rocketing through Green Hill Zone at breakneck speed was unlike anything players had experienced. In North America, the Genesis outsold the Super Nintendo Entertainment System for the first time that holiday season. Sega had its mascot, its console war weapon, and its cultural moment. Nothing would ever be the same. The early 1990s saw one of the most intense marketing battles in the history of consumer electronics. Sega's aggressive "Genesis does what Nintendo don't" campaign was bold, confrontational, and aimed directly at teenagers who wanted to feel like they were making a rebellious choice. Sega of America, under the leadership of Tom Kalinske, was firing on all cylinders: aggressive pricing, smart bundling, and edgier game content that included blood and Mortal Kombat when Nintendo censored it. Perhaps no single moment illustrated the cultural difference between Sega and Nintendo more clearly than the release of Mortal Kombat in 1993. Nintendo's version was sanitized. The blood was replaced with gray sweat, and the brutal fatalities were toned down. Sega's version kept the blood, the gore, and the controversial finishing moves largely intact, requiring only a code to unlock. Sales figures told the story. The Genesis version outsold the Super Nintendo version by a significant margin. The controversy ultimately led to the creation of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, the ESRB, in 1994, which still rates video games today. By 1993 and 1994, Sega was at the absolute peak of its powers. The Genesis had captured approximately 55% of the North American console market. Sonic the Hedgehog had become a global icon with his own animated TV show, actually 2 separate animated series, comic books, and merchandise. Sega's arcade division continued to produce legendary titles. Games like Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, Phantasy Star, Shining Force, and Echo the Dolphin had created a library that rivaled Nintendo's in quality and diversity. It seemed like nothing could stop Sega. But Sega's downfall began with a series of decisions so confusing and contradictory that they still baffle industry observers today. In 1994, Sega released the 32X, a cartridge-based add-on that plugged into the Genesis and was supposed to bring 32-bit gaming to existing Genesis owners while the company prepared its next-generation console. The 32X cost $159 and required its own power supply, its own cables, and sat awkwardly on top of the Genesis like a technological tumor. It launched with a tiny library and was discontinued after just 1 year. The 32X wasn't even Sega's first add-on disaster. In 1992, they had released the Sega CD, also known as the Mega CD, another peripheral that attached to the Genesis to add CD-ROM capabilities. While the Sega CD produced some genuinely interesting games, including the groundbreaking Sonic CD, it also became infamous for a wave of full-motion video games like Night Trap and Sewer Shark that were more interactive movie than actual game. The Sega CD cost nearly $300 at launch and never found a mainstream audience. While the 32X was still on store shelves, Sega was secretly preparing its true next-generation console, the Sega Saturn. Announced for a 1995 launch, the Saturn was a complex machine built around dual Motorola 68,000 processors and a sophisticated graphics architecture that was powerful but notoriously difficult to program for. The machine was designed primarily with 2D sprite-based games in mind, which made it excellent for arcade ports but challenging for the polygonal 3D games that would define the next generation. The pivotal moment for the Saturn came at the very first Electronic Entertainment Expo, E3, in May 1995. Sony was preparing to announce the PlayStation and its ambitious launch lineup. In a dramatic move, SEGA of America, President Tom Kalinske took the stage and announced that the Saturn was not coming in September as planned. It was already on sale that very day in select retailers. The surprise launch caught retailers, game developers, and even many SEGA employees off guard. Stores that hadn't been given advance stock were furious. Third-party developers who hadn't been warned were blindsided. Then came one of the most legendary moments in gaming history. Sony's Steve Race walked onto the stage at E3 1995, spoke exactly one word into the microphone, and walked off. That word was $299. The PlayStation would cost $299, exactly $100 less than the Saturn's $399 price tag. The crowd erupted. Sega's surprise launch had backfired spectacularly. By jumping the gun, they had alienated retailers, left developers scrambling, and handed Sony the perfect opportunity to position the PlayStation as the smarter, cheaper choice. Despite a rocky launch, the Saturn was not without its merits. It had an exceptional library of Japanese games: Virtua Fighter 2, Panzer Dragoon Saga, Nights into Dreams, Burning Rangers, and Guardian Heroes were all extraordinary titles. In Japan, the Saturn actually outsold the PlayStation for a period, but in North America and Europe, the PlayStation's combination of lower price, easier development tools, and massive third-party support, including the exclusive Final Fantasy VII, proved insurmountable. By 1997, the outcome of this console generation was becoming clear. Adding to the Saturn's woes was a change in leadership at Sega of America. Bernie Stolar, who had previously worked at Sony and helped build the PlayStation's North American launch, joined Sega and famously declared that the Saturn is not our future. This was a stunning statement to make about a console that was still on the market and had millions of owners who were now wondering if Sega was abandoning them. It was demoralizing for developers, devastating for consumer confidence, and a sign of the internal chaos that was gripping the company. Despite everything, Sega had one more miracle left in them. The Dreamcast was in development, and it represented a genuine leap forward. Powered by a Hitachi SH4 processor and an NEC PowerVR graphics chip, the Dreamcast was the most powerful home console ever made at its launch. More importantly, it contained a built-in modem, making it the first console designed from the ground up with online gaming in mind. It also shipped with a visual memory unit, a memory card with its own screen and buttons that could serve as a standalone minigame device. On September 9th, 1999, marketed as $99.99, the Dreamcast launched in North America. It was the most successful console launch in history up to that point, selling over 500,000 units in just 2 weeks and generating $98 million in revenue. The launch lineup was exceptional. Soul Calibur was widely considered the greatest fighting game ever made at the time. NFL 2K challenged Madden's dominance. Power Stone offered chaotic multiplayer fun. Sonic Adventure brought Sonic into 3D for the first time in a major way. The future looked bright, but dark clouds were already gathering. In March 1999, 6 months before the Dreamcast even launched in North America, Sony announced the PlayStation 2. The specifications were extraordinary, and Sony's marketing was relentless. Ken Kutaragi, PlayStation's creator, made bold claims about the PS2's Emotion Engine processor, describing it in almost mystical terms. Consumers and retailers began holding off on Dreamcast purchases, waiting to see what Sony was going to deliver. The Dreamcast found itself fighting not just the competition, but the shadow of a future competitor that hadn't even launched yet. The Dreamcast faced another severe problem: piracy. Due to a quirk in how the GD-ROM format was implemented, it was relatively straightforward to burn Dreamcast games to standard CDs and boot them directly without any hardware modification. The Dreamcast piracy problem was one of the most severe of any console, and it hit Sega's software revenues hard at precisely the moment when they could least afford it. Some estimates suggest that piracy cost Sega hundreds of millions in lost sales during the Dreamcast era. Despite its struggles, the Dreamcast produced one of the most critically acclaimed game libraries in console history, Shenmue. Funded with a budget reportedly in excess of $47 million, was the most expensive video game ever made at the time, an open-world adventure that pioneered many mechanics we take for granted today. Jet Set Radio introduced cel-shaded graphics and a genre-defining soundtrack. Crazy Taxi was pure arcade fun. Phantasy Star Online was a landmark in console online gaming. The Dreamcast library was a triumph of creativity that deserved a much larger audience. On January 31st, 2001, Sega made an announcement that shocked the gaming world. They were discontinuing the Dreamcast and exiting the console hardware business entirely. After years of losses that had drained the company's financial reserves, Sega's parent company, CSK Corporation, could no longer sustain the investment. The total losses from the Dreamcast era and the lingering debts from the Saturn have been estimated at over $400 million. With the PlayStation 2 already on the market, and Nintendo's GameCube and Microsoft's Xbox on the horizon, Sega had no path forward as a hardware company. In its final months, the Dreamcast received some of its most remarkable games. Ikaruga, a shoot-'em-up masterpiece from Treasure, pushed the hardware to its limits. Rez, a synesthetic rail shooter from Tetsuya Mizuguchi, was a work of pure art. Sega, released only in Japan, was a surreal role-playing game in which you played as a Sega employee trying to save the company. A meta-commentary on Sega's own decline that was heartbreaking in its self-awareness. The last official Dreamcast game released in North America was NHL 2K2, shipped on February 28, 2002. An era had ended. Sega's transformation from console maker to third-party software publisher was painful, but it also unleashed a creative freedom the company hadn't experienced in years. Suddenly, Sega could put Sonic on Nintendo platforms, something that would have been unthinkable just years before. In 2001, Sega released several titles for competing platforms, and fans were shocked to find Sega games appearing on PlayStation 2, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, and Xbox. It was disorienting, but Sega's software was still world-class. In 2004, Sega merged with Sammy Corporation, a pachinko and slot machine manufacturer, to form Sega Sammy Holdings. The merger was controversial. Pachinko had little to do with video games, and there were fears that Sammy's influence would push Sega away from its gaming roots. However, Sammy's profitable gambling machine business provided the financial stability that Sega desperately needed. It was an ironic, full-circle moment. Sega had started as a coin-operated amusement machine company in the 1940s, and now its survival depended on a company that made very similar machines. Sonic's transition to 3D was rocky, to say the least. While Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast had been exciting, subsequent 3D Sonic games struggled to capture the magic of the original Genesis titles. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, known among fans simply as Sonic 06, was released as a launch title for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and became infamous for its bugs, unfinished feel, and bizarre story that included a romantic subplot between Sonic and a human princess. It stands today as one of the most cited examples of a rushed, broken game release in history. But Sega wasn't only stumbling. In 2005, they released Yakuza in Japan, known as Ryuga Gotoku, meaning like a dragon, a crime drama action game set in the neon-lit streets of a fictional Tokyo red light district. The game was deeply cinematic, narratively rich, and unapologetically adult. It would grow into one of Sega's most beloved and commercially successful franchises, eventually spawning dozens of entries and spin-offs. The Yakuza series demonstrated that Sega still had the ability to create compelling new intellectual property. After years of mixed to negative Sonic games, Sega began course-correcting around 2010. Sonic Colors, released for the Wii, was a revelation. A bright, focused, and genuinely fun platformer that reminded players why they had loved Sonic in the first place. It was followed by Sonic Generations in 2011, which cleverly celebrated the franchise's 20th anniversary by blending classic 2D Sonic gameplay with modern 3D stages, letting fans play through beloved levels from throughout the series' history. The critical reception was enthusiastic. Sonic was back. One of Sega's smartest business moves came in 2013 when they acquired Index Corporation, which owned Atlas, the developer of the acclaimed Shin Megami Tensei and Persona series. The acquisition brought one of Japan's most creatively vibrant studios under the Sega umbrella. Persona 5, released in 2016 in Japan and 2017 worldwide, became a critical and commercial sensation, introducing millions of new players to Atlas's distinctive brand of Japanese role-playing games. The acquisition has proven to be enormously valuable, with Persona 5 and its expanded edition selling over 8 million copies. In 2017, Sega took an unusual approach to reviving Sonic. They handed the keys to a team of passionate fan developers. Christian Whitehead, Pagoda West Games, and Head Cannon were given the opportunity to make a classic-style Sonic game, and the result was Sonic Mania. Widely considered the best Sonic game since the original Mega Drive trilogy. The pixel art was gorgeous, the level design was inventive, and it captured the kinetic joy of the original games while adding new ideas that respected the franchise's legacy. It was proof that sometimes the best people to make a beloved game are the fans who grew up loving it. Sega's transformation into a major global publisher was also built on strategic Western acquisitions. The company owns Creative Assembly, the British studio behind the Total War strategy series, one of the most successful PC game franchises in history. They also own Relic Entertainment, developers of the Dawn of War and Company of Heroes series. These studios gave Sega significant presence in the PC strategy gaming market, diversifying their portfolio well beyond their Japanese gaming roots and creating a truly global publishing empire. Today, Sega is a very different company than the one that once challenged Nintendo for console supremacy. As a third-party publisher, they maintain a diverse portfolio spanning multiple genres and platforms. The Yakuza franchise, now rebranded as Like a Dragon, continues to thrive with new entries and spin-offs. Persona and Atlas's other titles have massive global followings. 2 Point Studios brings Sega management simulation games. Sports titles, Total War, and Sonic remain major pillars of the business. In 2020, Sonic reached an entirely new audience through a Hollywood film. After an initial trailer caused a significant backlash due to the character's design, which many fans found unsettling, the studio took the extraordinary step of delaying the film and completely redesigning Sonic to match his video game appearance more closely. When the redesigned Sonic the Hedgehog film finally released in February 2020, it was a box office success, becoming the highest-grossing video game movie at the time. It spawned a sequel, a third film, and a spin-off streaming series, cementing Sonic's status as a true multimedia franchise. Sega's legacy in gaming history is complex, fascinating, and impossible to overstate. They helped define what a console war looks like. They showed that aggressive marketing and attitude could reshape an entire industry's demographics. They produced some of the greatest games ever made: Sonic, Shenmue, Knights, Panzer Dragoon Saga, Yakuza, Persona, games that continue to influence developers today. And they demonstrated both the heights that a creative company can reach and the dangers of poor strategic decisions, internal conflict, and underestimating a competitor. The Dreamcast deserves a special place in this legacy. In the 2 decades since its discontinuation, the Dreamcast has become one of the most beloved consoles in gaming history. Its games are still being bought, played, and celebrated. New homebrew games are still being released for it. It represents a road not taken, a vision of online gaming, creative risk-taking, and player-first design that was simply ahead of its time. Many game developers who grew up with the Dreamcast cite it as their favorite console, and its influence can be felt in games to this day. What made Sega special was its willingness to take risks. The company consistently pushed the boundaries of what games could do and what they could be. They created the first console with a built-in modem. They pioneered online console gaming. They gave us cel-shaded graphics, open-world design before the term existed, rhythm games that used your entire body, and countless other innovations. Even their failures were interesting. They failed while trying to do something new, which is a very different kind of failure than playing it safe. The history of Sega is ultimately a story about passion. The passion of the developers who poured their hearts into extraordinary games. The passion of the fans who loved those games with an intensity that corporate failures couldn't diminish, and the passion of a company that, even when it made terrible business decisions, was always trying to do something remarkable. Sega may no longer make consoles, and they may never again be the cultural force they were in the early 1990s. But as long as games like Sonic, Yakuza, Persona, and Shenmue exist, as long as people dust off their Dreamcasts and remember what that swirling orange logo felt like, Sega will endure. Because great games don't die. They become legends. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the complete history of Sega. From service games in 1940s Japan to one of the world's most important game publishers, few stories in entertainment history are as thrilling, as heartbreaking, and as ultimately triumphant as Sega's. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and sharing it with a fellow Sega fan. Until next time, Sega.